This episode of the Craftsman Online podcast is sponsored by Bricks Masons. From elegant Masonic rings that showcase your commitment to our craft to finely crafted regalia and apparel that honor your tradition, Bricks Masons delivers quality and craftsmanship that truly stands out. Shop now at bricksmasons.com and use promo code CRAFTSMAN, that's CRAFTSMEN, to receive free shipping with your first order.
The comments, opinions, and views shared during this program are of those individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of a Grand Lodge, concordant body, appendant body, Masonic Authority, or craftsmanonline.com. Welcome to the Craftsman Online podcast, the only 5-star rated Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York. And now your host, Worshipful Brother, Michael Arce.
Hey, welcome back. You've joined us for an episode on the immortality of the soul. It's a question that not only do we get asked when we're petitioning to join a Masonic lodge, but it was the topic of a Lodge of Discussion program that I had here at my mother lodge in DC, where every brother had the opportunity to answer the question, why a Freemason must profess the belief of the immortality of the soul. My guest this week is Brother Angel Millar, who's the author of The Path of the Warrior Mystic, Being a Man in the Age of Chaos. We'll make sure to include the link to the episode when he appeared to talk about that book. Brother Angel, welcome back to the Craftsman Online podcast.
Oh, thank you very much. It's good to be speaking with you again, of course.
I circle the dates when I'm like, oh, we've got Angel back for a podcast episode. Well, the idea is that, the format of the program was different than most lodge presentations, where instead of having a brother who maybe read your book and gave kind of a lodge book report, or you came and gave a presentation or a PowerPoint deck slide, we had one singular question, little candles, and every brother that was in attendance that night got a little excerpt of your book, knew what the question was in advance, and was prepared to give their remarks on this. And it was really interesting because part of the practice of this was, yes, you got a chance to speak and share your thoughts, but more importantly, right, you also got a chance to listen to the other men who you sit in lodge with talk about their beliefs and their ideas on this subject, which is honestly something we don't get to do very often in our Masonic meetings or in our programs. So again, thank you so much for your part in facilitating this and making it happen.
Oh, thank you. Anytime.
So let's start with the question. One of the chapters of the many that are in the book, you actually kind of get into symbolism and death and the topic of mortality. And you don't necessarily focus on craft Freemasonry, but you do talk about this as it relates to history, as it relates to civilizations and to individuals. So my question to you is, how does all of this, the requirement to believe in the immortality of a soul, how do we see this in ancient cultures as well as in Freemasonry?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, right? So in regard to ancient cultures, I guess there's some debate about whether they really believed in the immortality of the soul or not. But it would certainly seems from the myths, maybe not always from the language that they talk about it, but from mythology, it seems like it. So, for example, in Norse mythology, which I'm probably a little bit more knowledgeable about than some other mythologies, you do have sayings. For example, in the Poetic Edda, like one cattle die and kindred die, but one thing that doesn't die is the fame of a man of renown, essentially, and which sort of implies that when the body dies, the individual dies, and there's no soul, right? But at the same time, the warriors who die in battle are being collected in Valhalla for this great battle. So something lives on after the death of the body, and also when you're killed, if you were killed in battle, the Valkyrie would come down and collect you and take you there. They sort of angelic, spiritual, divine warrior women. So something lives on, and then there is something else peculiar there in that the gods and the enemies fight and destroy each other at the end of time, but then something outlives that as well. So, and there's a new beginning, essentially. So it's a kind of cycle of birth and life and destruction. I suppose we, in our age, we tend to think of the immortality of the soul as existing in a time of, of permanence, and nothing is actually changing. So that is probably the big difference. You die, your soul goes to heaven, and then you're in this permanent state of union with God. But I think in ancient cultures, it was more cyclical, so things weren't necessarily staying the same, even if your soul was, detached from the body. So,
for the benefit of those who haven't filled out a petition to become a Freemason at their local Blue Lodge, there's 3 questions that are basically asked of you on that petition, along with some other information that we collect. Kind of like a job application, a little bit, in a background check sense of way.
But cooler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you believe in the immortality of a soul? And you've been practicing in Freemasonry much longer than me, but can you go back to the night or the time that you had that piece of paper in your hand and with your own handwriting was like, do I circle yes? Do I circle no? Like, what is this question and what is my answer to it?
Mine was yes, obviously. But
oh, you passed. That's good. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky once you start talking about things like the soul and immortality, right, or God or whatever, because it's not like talking about concrete things that we see in the world. What I think the soul is not necessarily what someone else thinks the soul is. And, and our conception of the soul has changed over the ages as well. I'm interested in the Old English. Maybe I'll just mention a few terms that were used 1,000 to 1,500 years ago in the English language, which actually kind of relate to Freemasonry in a weird way. So you find terms for the soul, and one of them is literally soul, SAWEL or OL. But you find others such as Brystlocker and Gaskoffer. And Brystlocker means breast chamber, literally, but it also stands for the soul. And Gaskoffer would mean something like a ghost chamber or ghost container. Gas is where we get our word ghost from anyway, but it also means literally the soul. So the soul seems to be something that's much more embodied in antiquity. You can think of course, even today, of the Chinese idea of qi, right? So qi just means breath, but it's also considered to mean a sort of invisible energy in the body without which we would die. The soul was embodied. We think of the soul as floating around in the atmosphere, and we don't quite know where it is. We have to do, strange rituals, not in Freemasonry, but if you join an esoteric order outside, strange rituals to speak with your soul or whatever have you. But to ancient man, when you breathed, he was breathing the soul, or when he was moving, the soul was moving as well. There's a quote from Bishop Alfrich. It's an Old English bishop, and I'll give you the quote in Old English and then translate it. And he says, "This man's soul hath on higher 3 thing, that is ye mind and eat and willer," which means a person's soul has 3 things, that is mind, intellect, and will. These things are embodied, right? So the mind is embodied in some way, or the intellect, the memory, and or the will, especially, right? You think of embodying the will through the body.
I'm just curious, was this the discussion that was happening in your mind while you were getting ready to make that decision, or was it just as simple as yes?
Oh, yeah. So, well, it probably was as simple as yes, but, nevertheless, I think you do have to ask what do you mean by the soul or by immortality? Point in referencing the Old English is that our conception of the soul has changed a lot and continues to change, whether for better or worse. Today we think of it as this thing that's floating around, whereas the soul for us is embodied or should be embodied. But then the question is, well, how can this embodied soul then be immortal if it's not in the body? So in regard to why does a Freemason believe in the immortality of the soul? In a way, it's difficult to explain, but partly, our character is an embodiment of the soul. Why are we trying to improve our character? Because we could just focus on, making money or something like that, right? Why should you bother about being a better person or being having a better character in some way. Freemasonry, in its practical sense, is about embodying the soul, right? That's actually what we're doing. I mean, why chip away, metaphorically, why chip away the extraneous, rough elements of a block of stone to create a perfect ashlar or perfect building block, which is the metaphor of Freemasonry, right? You chip things away to create the building block. But in a way, you could also say you're sort of chipping away the superfluous to actually begin to embody the soul and not to embody things that are kind of against your own nature in a way. But then at a certain point, as we all know, and as the Masonic ritual makes pretty clear, there's going to come a point when the body dies. And at that point, you are kind of aiming that you're to have a soul that would be immortal. But so what about for you? What about when you were there and the pen was hovering over the petition and you were wondering?
Well, I certainly didn't go to such a deep spot, because I should let the listener that maybe just has a general interest in Freemasonry, like, well, what are the other questions that are on this petition? Well, the first one asks, do you believe in the belief of a supreme being, not necessarily a god, but in Freemasonry, you'll hear us refer to that as the grand or the great architect of the universe, depending on what jurisdiction that you're
right.
in. Then that's followed with question number 2, which is do you believe in the immortality of a soul? So if question 1 didn't result in a yes answer, well, then chances are question number 2 isn't going to get that way either. And
yeah, for sure,
the chances of you becoming a Freemason are pretty much slim to none. You're not going to be able to connect with a lot of what you unpacked, which was just beautiful. For me, not knowing very much about Freemasonry, the first question I was like, oh, do I believe in supreme being? Yeah, I was kind of told that you have to believe in deity of some form. You can't just believe that you are higher than anything else, than any other power that's known to man or in the universe. So that's a yes. The second one, not saying this is a joke, but the 2 things that came to my mind was the Johnny Cash song, where the line where he says, I'm going to live forever. And I thought about that. And then I also thought about the lecture that my dad gave me about the dash on a tombstone, that you're born on this date, you die on this date, and your whole life is kind of summarized by that dash. So I thought of the immortality of a soul, and it's just kind of a side discussion of what you were more eloquently laying out with the Old English and some of the ancients that came before us and those civilizations and how those men perceive things, where I looked at it as, do I believe that my time on Earth, after that is done, the legacy of me will continue to have an impact on current and future generations? Or do I believe that when I die, they literally just put me in the hole in the ground and that's where it all just ends right there? And so that's what led me to go, yes, I believe in the immortality of a soul, because I thought of all the great people that I've known that have come before me, that have entered into my life, that I still remember them and want to emulate or honor some of the traditions or wisdom that they passed on to me.
Right. Yeah. Sure.
But I have had interested gentlemen in the petitioning process that did give a no answer. And it can be quite uncomfortable when we meet with them for their investigation to even consider if this is, a candidate that would be appropriate for a lodge. And just asking them, like, did you understand that question? Because as simple as it is, as you've laid out, like, the meaning of it is very deep. And I just wanted to make sure that they comprehended the question. And the man that I spoke with, he basically kind of laid it out like, yeah, I think, when you die, you die. And then I asked him in simple terms, like, well, do you believe in the legacy or the impact that you can have on the lives of others or even your community after you pass away? And he's like, well, yeah, maybe, but I still think that when you're dead, you're dead. And I'm like, well, I just don't think that this is going to be a good fit for you, because you kind of have to answer this question in the affirmative and give your own reasoning for that. I guess no is an acceptable answer, but it's just not one that's going to allow you to seek admittance into a lodge.
Yeah, that's right. Although, do all jurisdictions have that? I'm not sure that they do they?
I think they phrase that question in some form or of a way or another. In certain jurisdictions, the first question will be, do you believe in God? Depending on where you are, that could be deity, a supreme being, a higher power, however they put it. But I think the question number 2 is pretty solid For those wondering what the third question is, it's usually something to the effect of, have you ever been convicted of a violent crime or a felony? And that's also another question that can disqualify you as a potential member in Freemason. The Craftsman Online podcast is now sponsored by BricksMasons.com, our favorite destination for all of our Masonic shopping needs. Whether it's apparel for yourself or a cool gift idea for another brother, make BricksMasons.com your online marketplace where tradition meets innovation.
Have you heard about the Bricks Masons membership program? This is so cool. It rewards lodges every time their members shop at BricksMasons.com. That's right. You'll enjoy free shipping and exclusive prices on items you buy, and your lodge earns 5% cash back on total purchases made by members. Learn more now and sign up your lodge at BricksMasons.com.
Visit BricksMasons.com and explore their extensive catalog. Elevate your Masonic experience with style and substance. Plus, Craftsman Online podcast listeners use promo code CRAFTSMAN, that's CRAFTSMEN, at checkout to enjoy free shipping with your first order. I like how you started getting into the real core of the conversation, because this is what made the logic of discussion that I had interesting, was the variety of answers that I was getting from brothers, from those that have been in the craft for 20 years to those that have maybe just been in it for a few months as an entered apprentice. And we started touching on the soul and how it's been conceived of historically and how it's been thought of. But could you expand a little bit more on how the soul is a part of Freemasonry and our Masonic Lodge, especially when you get into, some of the ancient Greek or Anglo-Saxons ideas of wisdom, strength, and beauty?
Yeah, whether the soul is spoken of directly in Freemasonry, not so much, but yeah, metaphorically maybe. In regards to the wisdom, strength, and beauty, that would relate back to, Alfred's homily of Yimind and Yid and Willa, right? Memory, mind, and will. This division of wisdom, strength, and beauty can definitely be found in ancient, Indo-European society, with its division of the castes into craftsmen, warriors, and the priest caste. I suppose would embody the soul in a different way. So, even in Indian mythology or different mythologies, you find that the warrior caste come from the arms of God, and the priest caste come from the head of God, and the craftsmen come from the legs or something like that. It can vary a little bit. So each caste and all human beings are an embodiment of some aspect of the divine. In regard to Freemasonry with the soul, so we are confronted by these different symbols and experiences, or initiatic experience, which kind of reflects to some degree or another sort of ancient initiatic experiences that I think particularly young men went through as they went from boyhood to manhood. Really, this idea of chipping away the superfluities to reveal this perfect ashlar underneath, or the perfect square building block, is probably where we find the idea of the soul, right? Because why are you chipping things away? It's kind of to reveal your essence. And then in regard to immortality, the ritual is to a large extent directing us to think about death and what might be beyond death, and not obviously, death, God, what is beyond death for us. God, I suppose we would conceive of as immortal as well. And then it would suggest that we are trying to get to our essence, to somehow release, that could be released after death back to God, right? So I think that's the implication.
Yeah, all the pieces that you're putting down, I'm like, this is why I love having you come on here, because the story of Freemasonry, the allegory is that we are building symbolically King Solomon's temple. That's the narrative that goes through the degrees. And as we are continuing our practice through those 3 degrees in Freemasonry, we find out that what we're really building, that symbolic temple, is our temple. So what we're trying to do with the aid of Freemasonry is improve, enhance, strengthen whichever action verb that you want to use. We want to better our connection with deity, to be better understanding of what this is all about. So I think that's why that question is so important to men who have an interest in Freemasonry, because if you don't believe in the value of a soul, like I said earlier, all of these other teachings, they're never going to connect with you. You're going to have a very difficult time trying to wrap your mind around it.
Yeah, right, exactly, definitely. So how do you feel that your soul is embodied? Maybe especially as a Freemason, or how are you embodying it in or outside of the lodge?
Ooh, that's a really good one. So lately I've been studying some of the rectified Scottish Rite ritual and really getting into it. And for example, instead of referring to someone who's going through the first degree as a candidate, they refer to it as the sufferer, which really puts things into a different perspective. And again, made me think of our discussions in the past of the ancient rites of passage, where there was more than just like physical pain. There were challenges, there were barriers, that it wasn't just given to you, that you had to legitimately earn the knowledge that was trying to be presented to you, right? You still may have been blindfolded or in an interesting costume and taken around and disoriented, and these are all the symbolic steps that you'll go back later and learn the deeper meaning behind all of that. But it was that. And the idea of, hey, what you're trying to do is improve your relationship with deity. And if you can do that, then you'll then also understand that basically, in Michael talk here, is that you're not the only one on this planet, that the rest of the people that are populating this planet are all creatures of this same thing, that we're all part of this same greater community, right? And that we kind of should be looking out for each other. So I've kind of embraced it as a better lesson of the golden rule of the do unto others as you would want to have them unto yourself. That if you can, as you've kind of outlined, if you can perfect your ashlar or understand where the chips are and look to work to repair or smooth these challenges that you have in your own personal life, then you should also be able to better embrace those that are in your circle, whether that's your personal family circle, your work circle, your friends, neighbor circle, but also just in the circle of humanity in itself, that you do all of the things that you hear in other religions or in other traditions, whether it's, seek to understand or walk, in another person, learn to walk in another person's shoes. Like, you have a much greater appreciation and just a wider lens. You're not thinking of yourself as an individual. You're thinking of yourself as a member.
Right. Well, I think another important thing that's pertinent to this conversation is the idea of trusting in God, right? A lot of people who are into the esoteric, they're very interested in finding new, strange symbols that they haven't come across, or new, strange rituals with lots and lots of hermetic and alchemical symbolism, which is all fine. As Freemasons, we are supposed to, trust in God, right? That sounds, it's a sort of, I don't know, religious demand or whatever, but it's also a pretty basic demand as well. I mean, if you believe in God and you say, okay, I trust in God, whatever happens to me is, it's not up to me, it's up to this divine being or whatever. I mean, you're going to live a completely different life, right? Not only are you going to live a completely different life, but you're going to feel completely differently, right? When something bad happens to you or it threatens to happen to you, it's like the biblical saying, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And, people detest that today because it sounds very authoritarian, but in a way that's correct, right? Yeah, I mean, of course it's not correct if your life is laying on your couch munching on, chips and watching movies every night. Why would you want to fear the Lord? But if you're really engaging life, if you're on a battlefield facing an enemy, yeah, of course you want to fear the Lord, because in that way you're not going to fear the enemy, are you? Or and you should have that attitude in life, right? If you're really living life, there are going to be things that are frightening. Whatever you're going to push yourself beyond your limits. So you want to fear the Lord more than all the obstacles and risks and everything. I mean, obviously, you don't want to take stupid risks for the sake of it, but
well, and I know that you train in martial arts. I'm a sports guy myself, so the term training or practice, right? That's usually a closed situation where you have some control over the variables or of the outcome, right? Like, hey, we're going to run this play, or we're going to practice this particular move. It's choreographed, it's scripted. Everybody knows what their part is, so to speak, right?
right.
And what's the whole purpose of this? For one, for you to understand, to have a mastery of how to physically go through this. The second would, I guess, be to prepare your mind and how to execute so that this almost becomes a reflex and not much thought is put into it. And hey, those are great in practice situations. I've seen athletes, and I'm sure you have members in your martial arts community where they're fantastic when it comes to that situation. Beautiful form, excellent execution. But when you put them in a real life situation where now we're playing the game on Sunday, or in your case, it's time to display your proficiency to get this built or be in this situation, that's when all of the things that you've practiced should already be ingrained in you. But now that chance of being a human, where there's all of these elements that are coming up, there's your own doubts, there's your own confidence that's going to be called into question. You don't know what your opponent's going to do anymore. There could be a sound that distracts you somewhere in the room, a light from somewhere, just anything. And now you have to make these decisions. So as you're kind of outlining, and I say this to people all the time, I think it's wonderful if people have faith or a belief in a higher power, and that's the security, and it makes them serve life with purpose. I think that's wonderful. I think that it is borderline ignorant if you continue to feel that way and you're just a life in the stream, you're just a little leaf that's like traveling. Like you still are in the driver's seat. There's decisions and choices that you make every day that are going to affect greater outcomes down the road. You have to be an active participant. You can't just be on autopilot.
No, you can't be on autopilot. No, not at all.
I know that you're extremely busy, and we're so honored to have you on the Craftsman Online podcast, taking a little break from your time as one of the editors of the Fraternal Review. I got a chance to listen to a podcast episode with you in May, and there was a particular part of the discussion on fringe masonry where you took us back to the Chamber of Reflection, and you talked about a key phrase that would be inscribed or displayed on the wall, and how that would speak to the immortality of the soul. For our listeners that may never have walked into a chamber of reflection or have never seen those words before, can you expand on that a little bit?
So, yeah, if you want to live well, remember death is the phrase that we're talking about. Most, if not all, spiritual and religious traditions get you to think about death. And not just spiritual and religious traditions as well, but traditions that are maybe a little outside of that, but have to deal with the world as it is, such as martial arts. I mean, I studied Nampai Chuan Shaolin Kung Fu a few decades ago. Their tenets included life is death, death is life.
It's pretty intense.
So yeah, they were an intense bunch. And you find this in the Hagakura, which is in places a pretty dubious samurai text, late samurai text, where it says the samurai should meditate on death every day and imagine himself being killed by arrows and spears and disease and whatnot. And it's all very macabre, but in the Middle Ages in Britain as well and Europe, Christians were meditating on death, memento mori, and how to die well, partly because of especially in the plague, of course, because death was a real, really, really high probability. I know people think that we have gone through something similar, but we have not.
Well, also in your book, you talk about, especially in this chapter, you talk about how death in earlier generations, and I kind of brought this to light in my closing remarks that evening, was something that the average American would have seen a lot in their life in the 18 and 1900s. This is why we had such large families.
Yeah, that's right. Well, not just Americans, of course, but pretty much everyone across the globe. But, conditions were pretty harsh, so that was part of the reason. And you had children because you needed children to survive when you were elderly very often. But